You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 206 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, Pankaj, we are talking all things Lexi. Oh, no, wait, not Lexi. Aurora. Or is it Lexi? That is one thing we will definitely discuss. And we will discuss, is history about to repeat itself with this Pro Tour? And which Pro Tour does this Pro Tour London look more similar to? We might have slightly different opinions, which I'm excited to sort of talk through. But yeah, it definitely feels reminiscent of some past metas when it comes to the strength of Aurora in this meta game right now.
Lex Aurora, indeed, or Rexy. I don't know. Someone else can come up with a really cool mashing of both the names.
Aurora Livewire.
That you see, yeah, already, yeah, that was a much better mashing of the names than what I just did.
It's kind of there already for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this week in Flesh and Blood, how's things been for you? What's been happening? Getting prepped for Pro Tour London. We were speaking in the pre-show. It is creeping up exceedingly speedily. We are just 2 weeks away. I mean, you're like a week and a bit away from leaving. I am a week and a half away from leaving. Like, it's very soon.
So my week in Flesh and Blood, honestly, it's been kind of busy work-wise. Been kind of swamped at work, mostly because we are leaving for London soon, so I want to make sure I get a bunch of stuff done. But I did manage to get a couple of drafts in, and so that's been good for practice. And on the CC side of things, it's been a lot of spectating, actually. So my testing group has been super active, obviously, these past 2 weeks because the Pro Tour is coming up. So they've been playing a whole bunch of games, and I've just been like watching their games as much as I can on Discord. What about you?
Yeah, a little bit of draft for me, getting in one or two drafts. That's kind of my focus probably kind of from now until I get there. And I actually I've only done one in-person draft, which is so sad for me because, as people know, one of my favorite formats, I love to have cardboard flicked in my hands and passing around a table. So I'm hoping that when I get there on the Wednesday, I can find a draft or two where people might want to accommodate a lowly commentator, a lowly caster into their drafts. Maybe they have some free spots they need to fill. So if you do, shout out to me. I'm in London from Wednesday afternoon and around Wednesday, and probably a chunk of first half of the day on Thursday. If people have some drafts they need to fill, I am definitely there. I'm going to be drafting, so I will have a lot of draft experience, just not necessarily in person. And then Classic Constructed, I've played a little bit this week, but actually, yeah, I went through Kobe and I've watched a little bit of Sao Paulo as well, just to start to look at what people are doing out there as well, and just looking at heroes that are starting to creep up that I think might show up at the event, so I can get some either watch some games or play some games with that hero. I always try and play at least one or two with those heroes so that I understand kind of the cadences of their turns and things like that, and the tough decisions that players might have to make. So I can try and get a little bit of insight there. And then this weekend, I'm actually spending time with the Sydney crew, getting some in-person reps in CC, which would be good. Being their sort of testing dummy punching bag, well, gauntlet runner for this weekend to help them with their testing before they also head off, because we're about a week away from most people heading over to London. So it's getting very near.
I can't wait for the in-person CC testing that happens for a few days before the event itself, so where good. everyone's in in the country, in the city, and you're just like in the hotel lobby and everyone's just jamming games with each other. There's a bit of like cross-team testing going on, and it's just the energy and the vibes are just so incredibly fun. And before you know it, you've been playing Flesh and Blood for like 9 or 10 hours, and you've been taking like a lunch break every now and then. That has been really. I'm really looking forward to that part. It's probably one of my favorite parts of these events.
We've spoken about that before. It's not my favorite part, only because often I feel like I'm missing out. The other thing I feel I always realize is that I just realize that I don't have enough time. Like, that you get there and the games take longer than you think, the discussions take longer than you think, and unless you're there for like a good solid like 4 or 5 days beforehand, like it's really hard to get in enough testing, I find. I would love to circle event in the calendar one day, like a Worlds or a PT, rock up like 10 days before and just like be in the environment. Like maybe if they ever do like a Pro Tour Hawaii or something, right? You like get a beach house, rock up 10 days before, test the hell out of the format, draft the hell out of the format, head down to the beach every morning sort of thing, and like, go for walks and things, and then just grind through the day, enjoy your evenings, and really like get it done. But 2 days before is not always enough time. It's mostly like final tweaks and things like that, I think. So.
Oh yeah, to be clear, this is not majority of CC testing is done like 2 days before. It's more sanity check, kind of, just to make sure you didn't get something completely off. And if you did, you're probably going to panic. But
do you know what it actually is?
Probably tweaking.
It's tested. It's all the things that you start to hear. It's all the noise you're hearing that from, because people start to. The closer you get to an event, the more people start to talk, because it's like this kind of. It's like a snowball. One person hears something and they go, "Oh shit, is that real?" And then they talk to someone else, and then people start talking about all these things they've been learning in their testing group to like sense check. Are we the only ones finding this, or are the other people finding this? And all of a sudden you hear all these things like CYB new, like we should be testing against this. And all of a sudden people are like proxying up CYB new, like trying to get games in with that. And it's like, okay, we need to play this into this. We need to try this strategy. And I find in those last 2 days, what ends up happening is it's just like kind of chaos, honestly, because there's so much information. Like you've just got to be so good at filtering out the information and working out what reprioritizing. I think in those last few days.
It's so fun. Next thing you know, spoiler, yeah, Teklo-Vosen's actually real, everyone. Yeah, definitely go prepare for that 2 days before the event. Before we move on, I do want to echo what you said about the draft as well. So I will actually be in London quite a bit earlier. I'll be in London Monday onwards. So yeah, people, if anyone needs a spot filled for the in-person draft, definitely hit me up. We'll be looking to get some of that practice in. I need to get in a bit earlier because I have to attend my visa interview, Hayden, so I can get back to the US after the Pro Tour is done.
Do that. I would, yeah. Make sure you've also, if anyone going to London, make sure you've done your visa waiver for those who are eligible to make sure you can get into the country. I need to do mine. Probably something I will do tonight.
The ETA.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The ETA. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Shall we move on to the news?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So, calling Sao Paulo happened this past weekend. Congrats to the winner, Carlos Eduardo Amaral da Silva. I think I didn't pronounce that completely correct, but I believe his nickname is Cardu, actually, or Cadu, is what everyone in the Brazilian community calls him, based on the coverage that we were listening to. So congrats to him for winning on Aurora, taking down Florin on Enigma in the finals. It was a very, very good game, and I do want to shout out the casters for the event as well. Bryce Platts and Felipe Lima Cardoso for just some absolutely fantastic commentary. I especially enjoyed Felipe's insight into the Brazilian Flesh and Blood community. Like, that's how we know, Carlos's nickname. Everyone calls him Cadu there, which is really, really cool. And he'd know all the interesting bits of lore about the players themselves, which was amazing because this is the first calling that's been held in that region. Mm-hmm. And something that was missing for like the average viewer is insight into the players' stories themselves, right? Like when you tune into Pro Tours and we have big players on stream, yeah, we've seen them before, we know what they're about. But Felipe was bringing that insight into the players in their local region because he's from there, and I really appreciated it and made watching the games that much more enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, it's awesome. And Felipe, I'm correct here, Pro Tour top 8, right? World's top 8 competitor, right? Was the Kano from PTLA, sorry. Was that right?
It was a PT, I'm pretty sure. I don't remember which one exactly, but it was a big achievement.
We're getting to that point now where it's like, we've had enough events. It's like, what event was that person top? You know, originally it was like, you'd be like PT1, PT2, PT3 Worlds, and now it's like, no. Like, there's been enough. We're getting to that point where it's like, we've had 3 World Championships. We have 3 World Champions. We now have had 7 Pro Tours or something, 7 Pro Tours. Like it's now getting to that point where it's like, we can't actually refer to them that way. Or we need to remember exactly what event it was that person did X at.
Yeah, I don't remember which year, like which US national champion won. I'm like, there was Charles Dunn won something and Evan won something. Which one came first? I'm like, it had to be Evan because it was Zen. Like, you know, it's like you need to keep track of it that way.
Yeah.
I also want to shout out the Brazilian Flesh and Blood community. So, Hayden, I don't know whether you've had a chance to tune into the coverage yet.
I saw the final.
But when you do, and after you watch the finals, tune into that post-finals interview as well. Just the passion and the energy of the players down there. It's contagious, is what it is. They all came and swarmed the camera like after the interview, and they're all cheering for the local who won. It was, it was something else.
Yeah, that's awesome passion. Love it.
Next, we have ProQuest season is coming up soon, right after the PT London. So April 19th to May 17th, and all the promos and stuff were revealed on FabTCG. Is that the Guardian promos? I think it's a Guardian.
Yeah,
stuff, right?
it's the Velda stuff. So there's I think top 4 gets the new Velda adult hero. There's also like the promo card for top 8, and there's like the participation of like the new blues as well. Plus like the playmats is the Mangle playmat for top 2, which is pretty cool. So yeah, all these things look very awesome, and we also know, of course, that like you say, it's literally the week after that it kicks off. Like I don't know about you, like I'm actually gonna miss the first week of ProQuest because I'll be traveling back, which is a bit of a bummer. But looking forward to the season.
Yeah, I land back in the US the Friday, like April 18th. So I haven't looked into. Actually, I need to look into the ProQuest dates, my local ProQuest dates, see whether I can make any that weekend. But yeah, I might be missing the first weekend as well. Other than that, we have Proto London coming up in literally 2 weeks, and more on that in the main topic in terms of the meta and what to expect and which PT is it most like. Which past PT is it most like? Because as you said, Hayden, we have so many of them now.
I know they're adding up, right? And it is. I think it's nice to look back and compare them, because I think the interesting thing, like unlike other games, with the eternal nature of this card game, we have things to compare them back to from a hero standpoint. Like some of these heroes are still around, right? For instance, which is interesting. So even if you go back to World Championship, last Pro Tour, if we go back to Lexi, for instance, obviously not. If you go back to Starvo, not so much. But these are things we will chat about. With that said, though, I want to get into the Commander Cookout. If you do want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below, or you can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. If you're an Arsenal Pass patron, you can drop them in the Patreon Discord, or you can always hand us a note in London. Come up and let us know what your question is. We'd love to hear them. With that said, I have one this week from the Discord, a very timely question, and one about a friend of mine. It seems like there might be a bit of a reference there, but this comes from Discord, from our Arsenal Pass Discord, from... Oh, goodness me. Why do people choose these names? Alhufe Lakife? I don't know. Is that right? I don't know. Let's use name.
I don't. Yeah.
Pankaj is better with names than I am, as you can tell, but no one is as bad as Brendan Patrick, so it's fine. Question is, how detailed do you think your sideboard matchup notes should be for any given matchup? For example, the importance of cards in the 60, going first/second, general game plan, key cards / silver bullets. Asking for a mate. A certain doctor was very unhappy with the quality of notes for his Yal deck at this week's Armory. I think I know who this person is asking the question, because I believe that Mr. or Dr. Damakai played my Yal deck that I've been working on at the event this week, and clearly, apparently wasn't happy with my notes.
Should have given better notes, Hayden. So I think this is to some extent a little bit personal and just what is important to you or what you might forget. So for me, cards in the 60, 100%. I don't want to have to figure out on the fly like what I'm cutting into this other matchup, so I definitely want to know the cards in the 60. And then for me, the other one is, I guess it falls under key cards / silver bullets, or more under just specific interactions for this matchup that I might forget because it's, say, a matchup that isn't too common. So one thing that comes to mind, for example, suppose I'm playing Vincent. And I've been doing a lot of prep and a lot of practice into Aurora lately. I've been playing my event. I'm 3 games in. I've played 2 Auroras, 1 Enigma. These are the matchups I've practiced, the matchups I know very, very well. And in round 4, I'm against Verdance. And I'm like, okay, cool. I have my cards on the 60, but something else I want to put in there, something I want to know for sure, is specific interactions that are in my little sideboard guide that I know I need to be aware of. So, for example, be like, don't go overboard on Malefics because they might just scour them, like kind of thing. Just like something that's very unique to the matchup, and particularly if the matchup isn't something that I've put in most of my time into, but it has a very, very important piece that I need to understand, just to refresh my memory before I actually play that game, because you don't know when in your day you're playing this game, right? It might be like one of the later matches of the day, and then suddenly you've got this matchup. It's just useful to know, like, watch out for this, like, gotcha, if you will, or you can gotcha them with this.
Yeah, I remember playing a last match of a calling against an Azuri, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. Back in the day. Yeah, I would echo that. I think always cards in the 60. I never want to expend brain energy on working out what I should or shouldn't change. The one thing I'll add to that is that for a particular matchup, I might have a secondary note of going first versus second, what I prefer to change in the 60. And then I might have another note, which might, this is a note that might sort of evolve on the day of the event, which is probably around, maybe there's multiple versions of a hero floating around. So let's say like CYB is such a great example. If they're a non-CYB hero or they are a CYB hero. So if I know guaranteed they are or they aren't, that would potentially change my 60 and what I want to do, because that could drastically change my game plan, for instance. And then if they're not, I've done this. I have this in many of my cyber notes, which is like, let's take say the hero was like new, for instance. I would have like new non-CYB, new CYB, and then new hedge. Like that's how I would look at my I have 3 iterations of the 60 for that specific thing. And obviously the hedge would be the most common of what I would do, because I wouldn't necessarily know on round 1 of day 1 what I'm playing against. But as I go through the day, I might be like, oh, apparently there's only like 3 CYB news. So like I know who they are, and I can guarantee that, I can pick the right sideboard plan for that with my 60. Always going first versus second. I think there's some heroes where like I've played before where it would be the exception, where I'd be like, oh, I always go first, so I win the die roll, except in this matchup, or I always go second unless it's for this match, for instance. And then, yeah, I really agree on the key card / silver bullets kind of piece of it. And the big piece for me is like, what are the key cards on my side of the matchup and what are the key cards on their side of the matchup? And I would agree, like the less I know the matchup, or the less familiar it is, or the less recently I've played it, I'm going to focus more on those things. Like make a note of watch out for X card, or you need to play around this card for as long as possible, or even just like things that can just completely destroy my game. So if I was playing, for instance, Enigma, played CYB Enigma at Christchurch, for instance, new Aurora was in the meta. It was like, look for their lightning presses, look for when they pitch lightning press, look for how many lightning presses they've played, and think about the use of Phantasmal Footsteps in relation to where they could lightning press on the combat chain, depending on their chain links, for instance. So like I would never use a Phantasmal Footsteps to block on that Gone in a Flash, for instance, unless I had already seen all of their lightning presses. Those sorts of things. And then, yes, to your point, if it's a matchup I've not played very much of or never played, then my matchup notes will be even more detailed, of like maybe 4 or 5 bullet points of game plan looks like this, aggro them down, play defensively till pivot, whatever it is, watch out for these cards, play to these cards, careful not to arsenal too many cards against Arachne, slip through the cracks, for instance, because of XYZ cards that they can do and all this kind of stuff. So yeah,
just little reminders around. I think Arsenal priority is a very good one, and also like the gotchas. You brought up a very good point about the going first or second. I didn't very consciously realize this, but yeah, it does feel like most decks have a preference whether they want to go first or second, and you kind of always default to that unless you're facing a very particular sort of deck. So for example, like the aggro decks want to go second every time, unless you're against Vincent. You're against Vincent, you don't want them to go first, so then you just be the one to go first, kind of thing. It does feel like most decks are in that range of you want to go either first or second always, and then you have like a couple of exceptions.
Yeah, your game plan is just so much more, like enacting your game plan is just so much more powerful generally. And they're probably sitting on the other side of being like, well, I don't want to let you do X, for instance, as well. Like there is like a decent overlap where it's like you want to go first and they want to go second always. So no matter who wins the die roll, you're going to be going like the thing that you probably want to do is often going to happen. Well, not often. It's probably around like 30% of the time, honestly. It depends on the meta as well. But there, obviously, when you're playing, it's like mirrors and stuff like that, where it's like, well, no, like both of us obviously want to go second in this aggro mirror or things like that. So yeah, massively agree. And just going back to that, like sideboard notes piece, there's also, I will say you got to be careful of like too much information and like overloading yourself before the game even starts. You get to like the first or second turn of the game and you just make such a silly mistake because you've got too much going through your head. Like you just make like a really simple sequencing or play mistake that's relative to the deck because you're just so focused on the matchup and all these notes you just read, for instance, like, oh, I've got to watch this and I'm watching their pitch and all this because of X card, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just like IP'd myself because I did this thing, or I sequenced my plays incorrectly because I'm just not paying enough attention. So
yeah, I think that's definitely happened to me before as well. Just trying to keep too many things in your head and you forget the basic things.
Don't overcomplicate it. Any other thoughts on that question?
No, I think we covered it all.
It's a good question. If you want to get your questions in for the Command and Cookout, please do so. We definitely have some space for questions in the next few weeks. And as you say, if you're going to be in London and you want to come give us a question, please do so. With that said, Pankaj, I think it's time to get to the main topic of the pod, which is, are we seeing PT history repeat again with this meta as we head to Pro Tour London? But before we get into that, I want to do a bit of a meta update from this past weekend, of course, with the calling Sao Paulo, but also we had a Battle Hardened over in the Netherlands this past weekend in Eindhoven. So just a bit of an update on the meta. So when it came to calling Sao Paulo, Aurora did end up taking it down against Florian Christian Lajon in the final, as you said. Not on Florian, though, and that's where I got a little bit confused. Florian wasn't playing Florian. Florian was playing Enigma, to which he lost out there, of course, to Carlos. So Zen was the second most represented deck at the event. Aurora was by far and away the most represented hero over the weekend at Sao Paulo. It was almost double the representation of the second most played hero in the form of Zen. And then it was pretty close after that between Syndra, Nu, Dash.io, and then actually it just kind of cascades down about 2 between every single deck. But the top 4 decks played were Aurora, Zen, Syndra, and Nu. But it was interesting to see how much Dash.io was there. And we had a question last week about should I take Dash.io to the calling? And it sounds like a few of them decided to do it. Unfortunately, none made it to top 8 because the top 8 in the end was 3 Aurora, a Nu, 2 Enigma, a Florian, and a Dorinthia, interestingly, Pankaj.
I've heard from people who went there that region of the world really likes the aggro decks, and I think this matchup spread, this hero spread just completely resembles that, right? We have more Syndras and Dash.ios than Enigmas. We see more Prisms before we see Enigmas. There's 13 Prisms and 11 Enigmas, and I think that just showcases to you a bit of the regional bias that's going on there, like particularly the Syndra and the Dash.io, which I think a lot of people are getting lower and lower on as we get closer to the PT, but they're still very, very well represented at Sao Paulo. Which is probably, honestly, maybe a good reason why Dorinthia did actually as well as she did. Don't play Dorinthia into like a Syndra or a Dash.io, you're probably just chilling.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, even to Aurora, I think my understanding is definitely not a bad matchup, but not maybe as good as you might want it to be given how many Aurora are hanging around, unfortunately. Like, Dory does have a fridge, can block pretty well, but I think if you have to start blocking with Dory into that matchup, it's kind of a losing situation. So you do need to like stack those counters early and kind of snowball them a little bit. I thought what was quite interesting was that 11 Enigma, but I think like 4 or 5 of them were in like the top 16 in day 2. Like, they were really kind of like at the top of the field, which I thought was quite interesting, just given how aggressive this meta was.
And 2 of them made it to top 8. I mean, Enigma is just does Enigma things. I think she's very, very strong right now, and we'll get more into that in the main topic as we talk about, which one of the PTs this reminds us most of.
All right.
But yeah, I think Enigma is straight up there as like next to, maybe slightly above or below, depending on who you ask, Aurora.
So it seems like we're really solidifying, Aurora definitely top deck to beat, most represented. It's really sitting up there. Zen continues to be, that second or third most played deck, and Syndra actually, considering the fact it just does not put up any results, is really holding on to that third spot still, which we can talk about it. I think that is not going to hold into the Pro Tour. Nu, took top 8 in Kobe the week before and made it all the way to the final. I think we just spoke about Dash.io, which is quite interesting. Vincent, though, the 6th most played deck, quite interesting. What are your thoughts on Vincent?
I think Vincent's real. Vincent's just incredibly difficult to play and has I think you've brought this up many times before, and if people listen to Mansa and talk about Lavaya, he brings it up too. Just you're going to have games where you lose to yourself. It like a comment which Mansan makes a lot with Lavaya. He's like, you start the tournament 0-2 in a sense, and you have to win out. Because there's 2 games where it doesn't matter what your decisions were, you are going to lose because your deck just doesn't cooperate with you. Like in Lavaya terms, it's like you drew discarded a non-6, or you rolled a 1 on scabs, etc. Or you just drew a hand that couldn't turn off Blood Dead and then you died. Yeah. Vincent, I think, has a little bit similar problem on that front, but I think, what's it called? Like, win rate wise into the top decks, particularly the top decks we're thinking about Aurora and Enigma, I think Vincent is a very fine place to be.
Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah. Well, and then the other one that sort of stands out to me as well is as we go down this list of meta breakdown from the Calling Sao Paulo is Prism more represented than Enigma. Not by much, but a couple more decks showing up in the light field as opposed to the mystic field there for the Illusionist.
I think that also goes back to the regional bias, right? If you know your meta has all these aggro decks, firstly, Prism is a little bit more aggressively slanted in her own right as well. So she almost, I mean, she's an aggro deck, actually. Like, Prism is actually also an aggro deck. So it makes sense why the region favors her. And then also she's better into a field that's mostly aggro than Enigma is. So that would be my theory, my hypothesis for why Prism was more represented than Enigma, despite, in my opinion, being the weaker hero. Do you have any thoughts or hypothesis on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's to target the meta expected, to be honest, and I think people are testing a lot into that. Like, I think people are respecting Prism, I think, as well. Like, people are going to respect Prism for the Pro Tour. So, let's go to the Battle Hardened. The Battle Hardened was won by Jarl.
Oh, right. Oh, this is that weekend. I thought Battle Hardened was won by Fang. No, but that was in Eindhoven.
That's in Eindhoven. Yeah, the Sao Paulo one was. We'll get to that in a second. But Jarl won in Sao Paulo in the Battle Hardened on Sunday as well, beating out Aurora in the final. The top 8 of that looked like 2 Aurora, a Jarl, a Dorinthia, an Enigma, a Dash.io, a Vincent, and a Nu. So a bit more of a spread there, representing those kind of top heroes we saw on day 1 in the calling. But yeah, my boy Jarl getting it done. I told you, there's some life in Jarl.
I know you have said that, but I believe this Jarl was CYB.
I know.
Which is not what you said.
It's not what I said.
Yeah, you...
Hey, shows the strength of it.
Aggro.
Even it's a deck that I think is an inferior version still wins, so you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, all right. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you can dodge the Enigma, I think that's the thing about Jarl, right? It's like, okay, there's Aurora Enigma at the top of the meta. You can build a deck to be like fine into Nu. But then it's like, you're kind of coin flipping. You face Aurora, you're like, nice. And you face Enigma, you're like literally 0%. Like, there's no sequence of draws that you have in your deck that beats Enigma if you're like CYB Jarl. Unless I'm missing something. Maybe there's some secret tech.
No, I actually, the more and more that we get closer to London and the way the meta's shaping out, which we'll kind of start to talk about the shape of London once we get into past this meta update, I don't think you can bring Jarl, unfortunately. And it would be about now, it'd be dropping off my list of the way this meta's played out. It'd be dropping off my list. Unless something drastically changed in the week leading up to Pro Tour, it'd be dropping off my list about now, unfortunately.
So moving on to Battle Hardened Eindhoven then. Here's where we had a very, very interesting result. We had Fang taking it down. And the top 8, there were 2 Enigmas, a Dash Inventor Extraordinaire, a Florian, a Victor, a Zen, and a Levia. So no Auroras in this top 8, which I think, to me, speaks a little bit towards how this Fang managed to win at least like win out in this top 8, because I think the Aurora Fang matchup is pretty miserable for Fang. But Fang is really good into Florian. And perhaps this was a bit of a response to Florian taking down Colin Kobe. Because I think if you're trying to target Florian, you can play Fang and be very happy into it. And you could build your Fang deck to be also fine into Enigma. It's not going to be as good as, like, say, like Syndra is. But you'll still be fine. I think that matchup's playable. Aurora is one where you kind of really want to avoid. But unfortunately, she's going to be the most represented at most events. Yeah.
I mean, a really interesting spread of top 8. Like you said, I mean, a Victor being in top 8 as well. Like, you know, it wouldn't have been on my Levia. Like, wouldn't have necessarily been on my kind of list of things to be watching out for. So, yeah, I think it's. I don't know how much to read into this result, honestly. I'm really unsure. Like, not seeing an Aurora in top 8, but seeing decks that Aurora's good into. I don't know the meta breakdown. So it's at the bottom of my list in terms of impact on this past meta update this weekend. But yeah, it's interesting.
I think that region of the world generally prefers more control-y decks, right?
I think so too.
I think so. Yeah. It's like they do like their illusionists. They're like sort of just grindier type stuff.
That's my understanding as well. The one thing I do want to, before we get on to talking about similarities and meta ahead of this PT, just a little bit of a check-in on Talishar, because Talishar is a big testing tool for groups around the world, and I always like to check in and see what's being played there from a meta representation. The amount of Aurora that's being played on Talishar as well relative to any other deck is huge, which tells me that, you know, we're really heading towards a big Aurora representation at Pro Tour London. I think it's games so far in March on Talishar, 36,000 games of Aurora played. I think the second most, I was trying to figure out what the second most is. I think it's around that 20,000 mark. Yeah, and honestly, I think the second most played, interestingly enough, is actually Florian. It's Florian, or I think it's Fang, actually. Which is quite interesting.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe there's something that we don't know. Maybe, I mean, Fang just won a Battle Hard and it's being very heavily played on Talishar. Maybe there's something we don't know. Pankaj.
Maybe there's a build of Fang that beats Aurora. I haven't quite seen that yet, but yeah, maybe it's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so just thought it was interesting. And I just like to check in on win rates as well with these heroes that have quite a bit of representation. So Aurora sitting at that 55% win rate on Teleshar, quite heavy. And what I like to also think is that people are out there trying to beat this deck in testing, right? They're actively trying to beat it. But also you can say on the flip side, well, a lot of good players are probably also playing Aurora in preparation for the PT. So does it kind of even out maybe? But actually not the most winningest deck. I love using that word because people get annoyed about it. This month so far on Teleshar, actually Florian and Enigma both at a 56% win rate. Which is quite interesting. And also, I think Zen is at like 55 as well. So those are the heroes that are kind of doing a lot of winning on Teleshar right now. And then slightly behind those, things like Victor at 53, Vincent at 52, Nu at 53, for instance. And then everyone else is kind of average to bad. Quite bad.
It's funny that you bring that up because just before we got on this call, I was also looking at that, just looking at the most winning heroes on Teleshar. And so it looks like Zen, Florian, Enigma, Aurora are the 4, I don't know, quote-unquote decks to beat. And I guess spoiling a little bit, it does feel like Zen is potentially being slept on a little bit. His win rate is similar to Aurora. And if you think about the other the other decks that you have to beat in that top 4, which is Aurora, Enigma, Florian, Zen, into Enigma, I think you'd rather be on Zen. And into Aurora, I think Zen is just a hair, just like slightly favored, just a hair above 50. And then into Florian, I think you're both probably just like even-ish, right? I mean, Zen has a Cosmic Endgame, Aurora has combo. So it does feel like Zen is potentially better positioned than Aurora, but it just doesn't quite have the same draw from any players, or at least isn't being talked about as much.
It's not as powerful. Like, it just doesn't have as much raw power as Aurora, and I think that's always going to be such a big factor. And especially at open events, I think, when it's going to come down to some sheer numbers of players to a degree, I think it can change a little bit at an invite-only event, personally.
It's so interesting that you say it doesn't have the raw power, it's one of those things where I find myself impulsively agreeing, but if I slow down and think about it, I don't know, man. When you go chase the tail, make a Zen state into Aurora, that's kind of freaking powerful. Or when you block with Traverse and do dumb things, it's kind of very powerful. So
it's still powerful. I just don't think it has the same level of raw power that Aurora's currently got. That's all.
Maybe explosiveness is the term.
Okay,
that
yeah,
maybe
sure.
we can agree on. Yeah, Zen doesn't have Aurora's level of explosiveness. His ceiling is kind of like chase the tail.
I'll tell you what, Zen has a lot more terrible hands than Aurora does. A lot more 4-card 5s than Aurora does. That's for sure.
Yeah, yes, he does. Though a lot of those hands block better, so it's
So it's good into Aurora. I agree, but then what about some of your other matchups? I think that's the thing that, like, I think sometimes you just sit down against a hero and you're playing Aurora and you're like, oh, I'm already like 65 to 70% into this matchup. Like, it's just, and you sit down and Zen and you're like, oh, I'm like 55 to 60% of this matchup. Do you know what I mean? Like, just the fact that you can just be like, all my hands are going to be functional as Aurora. Like, they're going to do a lot of damage. I'm going to CLV someone at some point. Like, all these things.
If you're talking about like an average, like non-super represented deck, like the sort of like the tier 2 below decks, and yes, I agree with you. But if you're talking about specifically like the top 4 most represented that we are potentially
I'm talking about the next slot for sure.
Yeah, but if you're talking about like, PT, which is a bit more of a narrower meta, and I'm like, I expect to face some number of Enigma, I actually think, I mean, it's hard, like, we don't want to just go off Teleshar data, obviously, because it's like Teleshar, but I think it's fairly indicative that Zen is, you'd rather be on Zen into Enigma than on Aurora. Which I think is relevant. Yeah,
I agree. I think Zen's the deck that would, like, if I was playing the PT, and I think we'll talk about this in this probably a little bit this pod, but more so in the next pod and the pod the week after. If I was playing the PT with the testing that I have done, so not taking things from other players and things like that, and just the view that I have on what I think this meta is going to end up being for PT, Zen would probably be my personal front-running deck right now to be spending a lot of time on, and trying to really solidify that Aurora matchup. Honestly, like, and I think a big part of this is that I think if I was playing this PT, I don't think I'd be playing Aurora personally, because it just doesn't fit my play style. It doesn't fit the way that I like to shop to an event, the kind of deck I like to take to an event. But it is so powerful that it's probably harder than ever. Like, if I go back through the previous PTs, right, and I would say I've not played the quote-unquote powerful explosive aggro deck in a very long time. Like if we go to Worlds, it was Dash.io. I don't think I was ever close to playing Dash.io, like maybe 15% at 20% max at one point, because I was just getting destroyed by it in testing. That's probably as close as I got. KO, PTLA, like I didn't come close to playing that hero for PTLA. Worlds the year before, what was the deck? It was it wasn't Lexi, was it? What was the? I don't know if there really was an aggro deck.
The World San Jose?
Barcelona.
Oh, Barcelona. The one which Phi won. It was
the
meta was Dromai and Icelander, and then Phi took it down. Phi was the closest thing to an aggro deck, but it wasn't.
That meta was so
what
weird.
People were expecting.
That meta was so weird. I don't know if we'll ever have a meta like that again, where there just wasn't like a tier 1 aggro deck, which is insane. So anyway, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I fully agree with you, though. Zen is a very interesting prospect right now. I want to ask you a question, though. We just spoke about those heroes being Aurora, Zen, Florian, Enigma. Do you think they'll be the top 4 most represented decks in some order? Doesn't necessarily that order, but those 4 decks will be the most represented decks.
It feels strange to not have New up there.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think, I mean, I've been saying it the past couple of weeks. I think, and I don't know too much in terms of what the general player base is thinking, but I wouldn't be surprised if more and more players are coming around to the fact that New maybe isn't the best positioned. I think just looking at these other 4, New is unfavored into Enigma and Florian. Mm-hmm. And you are maybe a hair like favored into Zen, like a very, very slight, based on the way they're built these days. And Aurora feels like... So there was the Jacob Clemens list, right? The finalist at Calling Kobe, which seems to be like good into Aurora and has like a positive win rate, but I think Auroras are adapting. And I'm not entirely sure if that's still like a matchup you're happy to see. In which case, I'm looking at these other decks being like, why? Like, what are you hoping to see? When I bring New, like, what am I actually hoping to see? You know, when I'm playing, like, to your point, you said you might bring Zen. You bring Zen, and you're like hoping to see Enigma, and you're like happy to see that. I bring New, and I'm just like, what? I'm happy to see Victor, but no one's playing Victor. It's just like, there's none of these like highly represented decks where I'm gonna be pleased if I sit across from it.
Yeah.
So, so to come back to your question, it's hard to see Florian having more representation than New. I will give you that.
That's the question mark for me. But it won a calling, right? Just 2 weeks ago, and it wasn't necessarily well represented that calling. I have to go back and have a look. I think it was like maybe the 5th most or 4th most. It had better representation than I think I was expecting. It did show up in numbers, but then this week in Sao Paulo, it's the 7th most played deck. It puts 1 into top 8. We go over to like the Battle Hardens. It comes 2nd in Eindhoven. So I guess the deck does feel like Florian does feel real, but the question to me is like, how real is it, and where's it going to land? That's what I can't work out right now. Because I mean, for instance, to your point, New was more. I mean, Sindra. Like we seem to be saying, like we're both agreeing that the Sindra representation at these open events is not going to be the Sindra representation at something like the Pro Tour. But what about Dash.io and Vincent, for instance? That's
To be honest, a lot of the criticisms I had of New also apply to Florian, where you're like turbo unfavored into Enigma. Like Enigma, which was worse than News is. And you also, I mean, you're like fine into Aurora. You know, you're like fine. I just don't see enough of a big reason to bring him either. So my same criticisms apply there too. To be honest, I feel like Enigma and Aurora, top 2 most represented, 3rd and 4th. I don't even know if Zen is there, just because it seems there hasn't been a lot of buzz. A player's sentiment hasn't seemed to been very, very positive towards this hero for some reason. But if I had to pick, I'd probably say Zen is 3rd, and then 4th is a big question mark between New and Florian, I think.
It feels weird to me for Enigma to be the 2nd most played deck if it is by 80% of the population's estimations bad into Aurora.
I think that perspective might be changing a little bit. Actually, Calling Sao Paulo, I think, did a lot for that. Florian's Enigma list, which has Essence of Ancestry body in it, does work into Aurora. Like, Auroras really need to work for that, and if the Aurora isn't prepared, I actually think that Enigma is fine. And Enigma, like, we spoke about Aurora's consistency. Like, she does still have some terrible hands, and Enigma can just do the Enigma thing, right? Where if they catch you on the turn where you couldn't convert, you kind of just get rolled over. I think something that we saw on coverage a lot, actually, is Aurora's using the snaps to unbrick rather than using the snaps as a response to like Enigma's traverse, for example. And then if when they traverse, you don't have your snaps up and you bricked again, there you go, the game's just over. And then especially when the list is also tagged for you with Essence of Ancestry Body, etc. I think Enigma can give Aurora a tough time.
Yeah, but it's
a tougher
not favored,
time than
right?
Aurora's expecting.
But I guess
No, it's not favored.
It's just so powerful
not
that
favored.
it's like you take like you're so good against the rest of the field that you take the 40% or something, or even maybe slightly less into Aurora because the deck's just so
But
powerful.
it's not even
Enigma's
40. I would contest 40%. I think it's maybe 45
wow.
for Enigma into Aurora. So like a well-piloted tech Enigma, yeah, I think it's like 45 into Aurora. And then the rest of the field is like someone brings like a Florian or something, it's like, yeah, you're like literally like 70-80% into that. It feels like...
I don't know about that.
And like while Aurora's going to be... Okay, fine. Okay, it's 60%. Okay, will you give me 60 into Florian? The point is Aurora is like at most... Like, it's going to be somewhere in the 20-ish%, right?
Yeah.
Of the field. So, I mean, you take that into account.
Well, we might discuss that. Is it going to be in the 20th%?
I think so. But, I mean, that's still the higher range. The highest range of decks we've seen at a major has been in the 20-ish%. Like, 23 is
30s.
probably one of the highest.
Starvo.
Oh, okay. And I'm not counting Starvo just because it's Starvo. Like, past that. Like, past, like, a clear de facto... This is just the thing you should be doing. It's been like in the sort of the 20s, like 23 kind of thing. So then you still have the other 75+% of the field that you need to contend with, and Enigma kind of just trounces almost everything there.
But in theory, if you think Aurora is the best deck, there's a bit of a weighting on that, because it's like once you get to the second lot of CC/top 8, you in theory probably think that Aurora is a lot more represented than that. So it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of question marks for me, but I think let's get into that conversation about some comparisons, because I think you should kick us off. Just get into it.
Yeah, we've teased it so much. Like, which PT do we think this is the most? So, oh gosh, I feel like I'm already cheating. Well, okay, the one that sticks out to me the most, honestly, is PT Baltimore, because Lexi is Aurora and then Dromai is Enigma, where it's like kind of like what that meta was, right? The narrative of that meta was that, where you had this very strong aggro deck that didn't trounce the illusionist the way like a ninja does. It was like, that was like Lexi into Dromai, where it's like it was very much a game to be played. Me personally, I would have rather been on the Lexi side. I know some Dromais would have much preferred to be on Dromai side, obviously, but yeah, like you'd rather be on the Dromai side. But there was very much a game to be played, and I feel very much the same about the Aurora Enigma right now, where they're playing down, and Aurora's maybe a little bit favored, but you are playing that game out. It's not a have lunch matchup. It's not like Enigma into like Phi or something. Yeah. So it reminds me a lot of that. But all our conversation about Zen does remind me a little bit of PT1 a little bit, where there was Starvo, Prism, and Chain. Mm-hmm. And then Starvo's the Aurora, Prism's the Enigma, and then Chain is the Zen, which is like that sleeper pick that is kind of like fine to play into either of those heroes, and is also just like strong. So, okay, to answer the question very, very clearly, I'd say PT Baltimore, and then there's elements of like the PT1 because of the Zen sort of wild card. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I'm mostly aligned to you. I think it's quite interesting. A couple of things I want to point out, and then some spice I want to throw in the pot to mix around and ask you some questions on. Is I think if we go back to PC Baltimore, I think Lexi was actually like 26% of that meta. I need to go and fact check myself, but I think it was around 24.5 to 26. I can't remember exactly where it landed.
I don't know why I had 23 in my head, but okay.
I think KO was 23 or 22.5, I think, from memory. Generally, the top most played deck is around a quarter. It's usually sub a quarter, but not far off of it, right? Except for Starvo, which was, I think, like 32% or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's Starvo. That's just that's anomaly in more ways than that.
For sure. We also had a more narrow hero spread then as well. And I think if you look at the playability of heroes, we're probably, especially in that, like the second tier of heroes is bigger than ever, like in terms of playability. So I think it's just going to be so hard to get to that point. Like, even though Aurora's clearing away the best, like if I had to guess right now, I think Aurora is going to be somewhere around the the Lexi mark. Like, and I think it's going to be maybe I could see it being slightly more, honestly, because but there's this kind of momentum that's starting to come behind Enigma, like you say, back to Enigma, might even come back to another hero like Zen as well. Plus that kind of tier 2 range of heroes that people want to try and come and counter with. I think it could get as high as 27, but I could think it could get as low as like 23%, like 22.5%, 23%.
Wow.
So yeah, I honestly think it could be in that range somewhere. I mean,
my guess is in the 18 to 22.
Wow.
Actually.
Okay.
18 to 23, maybe.
Sure.
I think the lower.
I will be
end is
shocked if
a
it's
little
less than
bit
20%. If it's less than 20%, I will be floored. Like something drastic has to happen in the next 2 weeks for Aurora to be less than 20% representation at PT London.
I would be surprised, but to me, it's in the realm of like I would be shocked if it's above 25. I think that's where we differ. I'd be shocked if it's above 25.
Okay.
I can fathom it being below 20 more than I can be fathom it being above 25.
So it sounds like we're creating some standard deviations within the Arsenal Pass team here of around sub 20 and above 20 is the next. That's the first.
Oh, okay. I think we both can be aligned. Probably like 23ish. So let's just
it sounds like that's where we're landing. Is we probably think on average
Yeah.
between us it's going to land somewhere around 23%, probably. But
agreed.
Pankaj thinks it has a chance to lean lower. I think it has a chance to lean higher. Is kind of I think what we're saying effectively. So the thing I think is that I find interesting is okay. Let's take this comparison to PTs. Let's take PT Baltimore for instance. And I think something that's quite interesting to me if we go back to PT Baltimore is I think, and this might be biased, but just indulge me, that Ultim was a very good pick for that event if people had the right list. I think
it's so interesting. Sorry, go on.
Well, I'll just finish my point because we went to Singapore 2 months later. Myself, Nick Butcher, Matt Rogers played the exact same 80. People were still not believing in Ultim at that time. It was fairly underrepresented, I think, at that event. We put all 3 of our 80s into the top 8 with Nick winning that event. And honestly, in testing, it felt like the Lexi matchup was just insanely good, and the Dromo matchup was also pretty good. So I don't know. I think Ultim, if people had gotten to that list that Matt and Nick had kind of worked a lot on for that event, they probably would have been in a very good spot. But let's just indulge me. What's that third deck then if you're comparing it to Baltimore?
Yes, I will answer that question, but it's just so interesting that you said that about Oldham when the winner of that event, like Michael Fung, in his interview said he felt unfavored into Lexi and didn't want to face a single Lexi and said he didn't face Lexis and that was a big
he won the Pro Tour and he beat Lexi to do it.
Anyone?
So I don't know. He also had, to be fair, had a very, very different approach to that matchup than like what the Ultim deck that we played at Singapore did, for instance. Like we fatigued every Lexi. Very different to what Michael was doing, for instance. Very different list, honestly. Very, very different list.
So to answer the question about the third deck, I think it is Zen, right? It's kind of what we've been talking about. I would put that as like the third very... Like if you told me Zen won PT London, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Be like, that totally checks out. Which is why it's a little bit reminiscent of PT1, a little bit more than PT Baltimore. Like it could be argued that because I think if you told someone before PT1 that Chain wins the Pro Tour, they wouldn't be surprised either.
But they might have been surprised
it's in that
if
same
you
boat.
said Ultim was going to win it and then Ultim won, which it did in Baltimore.
Yeah, I do think
Yeah.
a lot of people were surprised that Oldham won
100%.
PT Baltimore. Yeah.
And I think if Florian hadn't won a calling in Kobe and Florian won at PT London in 2 weeks' time, that would be very much like, well, I definitely didn't have Florian winning that event, right? Like that would almost be Fi-esque winning Worlds. But actually, I think when you look at it, it's like, no, I mean, this deck is real. It's been around. People are playing it. I think, like, honestly, the comparison to Ultim to me might be new, honestly. Like if that's the view you have of Ultim of like, you don't want to play against the best deck. It's maybe good in some other decks, but good in the hands of the right pilot, has a lot of play to it. Maybe new is actually that comparison, which is interesting. So
I think that's a great point, actually. Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, I actually did not draw that parallel until you just said it. But yeah, I would be a little bit like new is not on my I think new is winning the Pro Tour thing. Of course, I mean draft also obviously plays a big part in these things. But yeah, if I had to, I wouldn't bet on new basically, which would put me in the camp of being surprised if she wins, which is the same as like being surprised Oldham won PT Baltimore.
Yep. So I have a question, just my last question, I guess, which is if we're comparing it to PT1, I want to know which hero in the current pool is the Briar that kind of sneaks in and makes a an interesting run. But more so, I want to know, what's the Kano deck? Where am I meant to find my Kano deck for PT1 in this PT London scramble of things?
I have an answer for the Kano one. I actually, when you said Briar in PT1, I was like, was Briar legal in PT1? I'm like, oh yeah, of course she had to be, because like Starvo was there and she was released before then. That's how irrelevant I feel like Briar was in PT1. I'm not into, like, was Briar relevant in PT1? Am I forgetting something? Because am I supposed to answer like?
No, it's fine. I'm more interested in the Kano piece, but Briar did make top 8 in PT1.
I see. The Kano piece, I think my answer is Vincent on that one, where you actually do have game into the top decks, and it requires a very specialized pilot, and it requires a pilot to be very specialized and very, very knowledgeable and understand your windows and have a game plan from the beginning and work towards it.
Yeah, I don't know what mine is.
Do you have?
Maybe it's Riptide. I don't know.
Okay, but Riptide's like unfavored into both Enigma and Aurora, right?
Is it?
I
don't know.
Yeah,
but that's the thing. Like, it's got to be something. In my view, it's got to be something that's coming out of the woodwork, and it's a strategy that people maybe haven't thought about or something. I don't know. So maybe it's Fang. Maybe that's what we're missing. It's actually Fang, and we've just missed it all along.
Could be. Yeah,
combo Fang.
The Aurora tech that Fang has. I want to come back to the PT Baltimore analogy over here, and I think we both agree that Aurora occupies like the Lexi spot if you look at like the PT comparison. Is that correct?
Explain it to me. Yeah, but explain it to me. I feel like you're going to dive into why that is.
Yeah, so I have an observation about Aurora, which is not only is like her space like similar to the space Lexi occupied in PT Baltimore, I actually think the decks or the gameplay is also very, very similar. And that recently, the past 2 weeks, I've been playing against Aurora and being like, I'm getting vibes playing against you that I used to get playing against Lexi. And I'm 100% going to be misquoted here. So I'm just going to be very, very specific to try and not be misquoted and go be misquoted anyway. I'm not talking about power level. Obviously, like Lexi was a magnitude above in power level. But I'm talking about like the structure of the turn cycles and kind of how it feels to play against it. And specifically what I'm talking about is that when Lexi had a normal turn, just a regular turn, I already felt under pressure and I already felt like I was like drowning. Just if they had like 2 to 3 back-to-back like normal turns, I'm already feeling like I'm drowning because they're like, here's a Heat Seeker, you have to block it. Okay, now here's my Endless Arrow, you have to block this too. Here's my just whatever Blood Rot token is just like a bit more damage, and then here's another on hit you have to care about, and I'm just constantly already drowning from the normal turns. And then as I'm like, okay, when is this going to end? Like I'm forced to block all these on hits again and again. When's it going to end? They're like, by the way, here's Rain Razor 3 of a kind, blow you up. That's what I mean by similar to like Aurora reminds me of that, because her normal turns are like, okay, cool, here's Lightning Surge, Rabble, Snatch, which is 4/4/4, which is already a very good rate, which is more than what most decks can do consistently with an on-hit there. And that's like the normal turn. So I'm kind of like block these out, and I'm kind of already like falling behind. I'm having to give up armor, all this kinds of stuff, and just falling behind on rate. And then they're like, oh, also, by the way, here's Arc Lightning CLV, blow you up. Yep. Just send you to the afterlife. And that's what I mean by she reminds me a lot of Lexi. She just has these implicit 2-for-1s in the deck, right? Like Lexi had like Codexes and the Heat Seekers and Endless Arrows, and then 3 of a kind Rain Razors to like have a combo turn. And then Aurora has like these Snatches and Somersault, which is like literally just a 2-for-1 on a card. And amazing rate cards like the Serenades and Snatches, and then they also like, here's Arc Lightning CLV, is kind of my whole spiel on why Aurora. Just an observation about Aurora is that she reminds me a lot of Lexi. Again, not the same power level, but similar in structure and the way the game plays out.
Yeah, there's one other thing that reminds me of Lexi. And it's something that could potentially happen. And I think it's that Lexi was so powerful that I think the more you played with Lexi, you realize that it was just so far and away the best deck. It was so flexible. It could do so many things so well. You could play your way out of so many situations and games. You know, like you play into a bad matchup, a deck that prepped for you, had all this hate, and you had ways to build up turns to get around it. You had end games to pitch into to play around it. And I think people are going to come to that same realization with Aurora. And I think people are going to sit there and say, I can't not play Aurora. Like, it's just too good. I think a lot of the best players in the world are going to sit there and be like, I just have to play Aurora. Like there's literally no other option other than playing Aurora, because I can't beat it now that I know how to do these in games, or now that I've worked out in my testing how to enter into these spaces where I can have game into everything or almost everything. And that reminds me a little bit of how Lexi felt in that meta, I think. And that's actually why I think that we could see Aurora be, upwards of 25% of the meta, is because of that very fact of like, you know what, there's other options you can play, but this hero is so powerful that even if I, had a slightly better matchup into Aurora, say the mirror's 50-50, I have a 60% into it with this deck, I just don't have anywhere near, the 60%ers that I have with Aurora, because I just feel like I can beat my bad matchups with Aurora. So that's kind of the other comparison I kind of make.
You bring up the hate and the playing towards certain endgames, and the card that immediately came to my mind was Exude Confidence. Mm-hmm. Just everyone's running around with these 12D reacts in their decks to try and beat Aurora. And I think before this meta, there was some people who still didn't like playing Exude and Aurora for some reason. But now it's becoming more and more clear. Just slam 3 of them in your deck, and then these decks that are trying to run 12D reacts are just going to catch them with 2D reacts and no attack to like turn off the Exude, and then they kind of just die. It's exactly to your point about how she's similar to Lexi in that sense, where she can play her way or like play towards certain game states that give her advantage even against a deck that's prepped for them. Which, it's like the general nature of an aggressive deck that is resilient to both disruption and fatigue.
Yep.
Just very Lexi-esque.
Yeah, I think that's it. Anything more to say on, I guess, comparisons to Lexi, comparisons to other decks? Just thoughts on Pro Tour London versus previous Pro Tours, and maybe realistically just where you think we're going to land for this Pro Tour. It kind of sounds like we mostly agree.
Yeah, I think the biggest question mark, or the thing I'm going to be watching for is a Zen, like a really skilled Zen player. Also, very, very relevant. Something that wasn't clear a month ago was whether Zen would be legal for PT London.
Yeah.
And I think it's basically confirmed. We have like Battle 100 Milwaukee happening this weekend, which is a team event, and Zen can get 25 points there, I believe, if he wins.
He needs to get 50,
but I don't think,
right? He needs to get 2 wins, right?
Yeah, I don't believe, like 90% confident that there's no way he LLs before London. And that's very important, because literally a few weeks ago, this wasn't clear whether he's legal for London. But now that we know he's legal for London, that's going to be something I'm going to be on the lookout for.
Yeah.
Just a very, very skilled Zen opponent who can... See, unlike the hate or like the playing around that Aurora can do into some other decks, I'm not sure if she has the same level of flexibility into Zen specifically, just because of the Zen state. Like, obviously, it's still a game to be played, but I think a very skilled Zen pilot could make that matchup just tilt a little bit in their favor. And then we already spoke about her. He's well positioned into like Enigma and Florin and stuff. So I could see like Zen's the sort of... It's not a dark horse, because he's been too popular to be a real dark horse, but it's like a weird thing where he's on the spotlight, but he's still very, very viable. Yeah.
What's really interesting about Pro Tour Baltimore comparisons as well, just taking it back, is like Ultim was the second most played deck at that event, not Dromai, which I think is really interesting as well. So I just did some fact checking while Pankaj was talking there. Lexi was 23 and a bit % of the meta at Baltimore, 23.2 to be exact.
So it was 23. Okay.
Ultim was 18. Did you say 23? Is that right?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, I don't know why I thought 23,
Yeah.
and you said that it was because of KO. I don't remember what KO was, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was closer to 25. But yeah, 23%. Ultim was 18%. Dromai was around the 16% mark. So quite an interesting like spread of heroes there, even at Baltimore. So it's like, yeah, I mean, this PT could get quite interesting, and I think a hero like Zen, to your point, it's very viable. It's very, very viable.
Yeah, and regional biases coming into play as well. Europe does like their slower, grindier stuff, which I think maybe just pushes a few more points to Enigma potentially being slightly more represented than if it was in a different region.
Yep, I can see that. Cool. All right, well, I think that basically does it for us for episode 206 of Arsenal Pass. Will history repeat? That is the question on, well, it's at least on our lips. We'll see about it, whether it's on others and how others are feeling. Although, to be fair, actually, this morning I saw a note in my testing group where someone had a very similar thought process to us actually about Pro Tour 1. So I thought that was quite funny that we had been messaging and been talking about it, and then someone else had a similar kind of thought as well, which was funny. So yeah, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. And as we get into these next couple weeks, I mean, we're going to talk about meta. I think we're going to get, as you say, battle hardened this weekend, and that's going to set us up on our way in terms of maybe a bit more information. But actually, I was just going to the events page because, to your point, like what else is actually left? So we have Milwaukee this weekend, as you say. There's also Jakarta next weekend. And
that's
Dublin.
a battle hardened.
Yeah. So I'm just checking the.
Wait,
format.
so Zen could LL then, right?
It can, yeah, because
he needs to win 2 of those.
Yeah. Does so. Just looking at this, so Dublin is definitely CC, and Jakarta is also CC. So yes, it could actually LL still. Just
oh my god, this has been a massive psyop. No one has been talking about Zen because they just don't want him to LL before London. We figured it out.
Yeah, that's the psyop, friends.
That's it. Every team is just keeping it under wraps, and then Zen's gonna be 40% PT London.
Yeah, we will see. Well, we're talking a lot more about the meta next week, though, I'm sure. All right. Well, that's going to do it, as I say, for episode 206 of Arsenal Pass. Big shout out to the Arsenal Pass patrons. Thank you for your support. And until next week, we will see you in the next episode.